Hi everyone, I'm Sophia Benantisayani, Cisneros Scholar Class of 27, and I'm so lucky today to be joined by Professor Gema Kloppe-Santamaría. She's an assistant professor of Latin American history and international affairs at GW. Her work centers on questions of violence, crime, religion, and gender in the 20th and 21st century Latin America, with a particular focus on Mexico and Central America. Professor Kloppe-Santamaría is also a Cisneros affiliate faculty member. Professor Kloppe-Santamaría, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Sophia. It's a pleasure to be able to talk to you this morning.
Thank you. So good to hear from you. So we're going to start off with a very simple question, and we just want to delve more into the specifics of what your research focuses on.
Of course.
Mhm. What brought you to study your area of expertise?
So, as you were saying earlier in your introduction, I work on questions of violence, crime, state formation, gender, religion in Latin America, and the intersection of these topics. And one of the key issues that drove me to study these topics is the prevalence of violence across Latin America. No, I mean we see countries that are quite different. I mean, from Argentina to Colombia to Mexico, Brazil, like facing challenges of crime and violence. So my interest in these topics really started from the awareness that that this is a pressing challenge in the region. I mean, it's one of the most pressing concerns for Latin America, for Latin American citizens, even more so than economic development, is the question of insecurity, crime, and violence. So I became interested in exploring these topics. I always like to say that I consider myself a historian of the present because I'm always trying to understand, how historical analysis can help us shed light on the challenges that we face in the present, and hopefully like provide like some answers that help us address these challenges. So those are the main drivers for me, or the main inspiration for me, is to try to understand the present.
Awesome, that's really good to hear. And speaking about your most recent work, the Spanish translation of your book, In the Vortex of Violence, was recently released. Can you tell us a little bit about what the book is about or what the writing process was like for you?
Yes, of course. Thank you for that question. So indeed, my first book deals with the uncharted history of lynching in post-revolutionary Mexico from 1930 to 1960. I analyze a wide variety of sources, including official documents, newspapers, other periodicals, letters of complaint, security reports, but also like film, lithograph, and other works of art, in order to try to reconstruct the history of lynching. No, I mean the sort of like a spectacular and collective killing of individuals that are considered to be dangerous or threatening. And as I mentioned before, like this is a history that hadn't been explored before. And as a matter of fact, I would say that this is the first systematic effort to understand the history of lynching in Latin America as a whole. No, I mean, in contrast to the history of lynching in the United States that has been, explored in depth by dozens of scholars and especially historians. In the case of Mexico and Latin America more broadly, that's a story that we don't know about. No? So my as with my overall research agenda, like one of the main motivations was to try to see if this history could provide like some interpretive tools to understand the present, no? Because again, like lynchings is not a thing of the past as it is in the United States, but lynchings continue to happen in several Latin American countries. It's healing it so in Mexico, but also in Guatemala, Bolivia, Ecuador, Brazil, and several other countries. So I try to analyze this story, and I also like in this book and also in my overall work, I always try to bring in intersectional lenses. No, so I try to see how class, ethnicity, but also gender, how those impact both the patterns that I see in the commission of these acts, but also the perception of those individuals that are considered dangerous. And so I analyze what I have called in other occasions the precursors of femicides, no? Because I analyze many cases where the victims are women that do not fit or do not comply with the standard hegemonic understanding of what a quote unquote good woman should be. No, I mean in terms of like motherly care, domesticity, passivity, and so these women were accused of being witches, and basically that process of scapegoating tells you a lot about how like gender lenses are so critical to understanding patterns of violence in the region. And indeed, the book was published originally in 2020 with University of California Press. I wrote it in English. English is not my mother tongue, but of course I was trained in the United States, so I wrote the book in English. And then I always knew that I wanted to translate the book. I am originally from Nicaragua. I grew up in Mexico City. And to me, it was important that if I was writing a book about the history of lynching in Mexico, that it would be available for Spanish speakers and that it would be published in Mexico. So it was published in Mexico last year. A translator did the work of the translation, but I review everything. I went back to the primary sources to make sure that the language was right. And I also, did a technical revision. So it's a very, I would say it was a very demanding effort, but I knew that I wanted to do that because I knew that I wanted the public in Mexico to be able to engage with this work. No, so it was truly important to me to do that. I mean, both as a Mexican scholar and as somebody that cares deeply about what is happening today in Mexico and other Latin American countries.
Definitely sounds like a labor of love, and we really appreciate hearing some insight about the process. Speaking of which, we want to know, what has the biggest challenge you have faced in academia been, and how have you been able to overcome this?
Yes, that's a very good question. I mean, like academia, I think I would say that the vast majority of us that decide to become academics, it is sort of a labor of love. No, I mean, we do it because we love the process of researching and writing, because we love teaching, because we really love this sort of dialogue with our students. I mean, for me, like teaching is one of the most rewarding experiences. No, when I get to learn from students own impressions and understandings of these topics, and we can really create a constructive dialogue in class. But of course, as any other profession, it has challenges. No, and I would say in my case, one of the greatest challenges, which I like to see as an opportunity, because I guess I like to be positive about things, but is the fact that I'm a very interdisciplinary scholar. So I was trained, so just to give you a snapshot, I got a bachelor's in international relations in Mexico City. Then I did a master in gender and social policy at the London School of Economics. And then I did a PhD in sociology and historical studies at the New School. So what am I? I am a historian. I think primarily I identify as a historian, but I also identify as a sociologist. I also always to incorporate gender analysis. I also like to think internationally, no? So sometimes, I mean, I don't have an issue even presenting myself and presenting my work as a interdisciplinary or even transdisciplinary scholar, but sometimes it's difficult for for kind of spaces or scholarly spaces that are a little bit more traditional and that want to put people in boxes. I mean, luckily for me, at GW, they really encourage this sort of interdisciplinary thinking. I have a home at the history department, but I also I am affiliated to the Elliott School. I'm affiliated to Cisneros, and I think all of these spaces are really wonderful in terms of what unites us. So again, sometimes that's a challenge. Lucky for me, not at GW, but that can be a challenge sometimes.
The passion that you really have for your work really shines through that response, so we really appreciate it. Speaking of, the Latin American diaspora and, finding community at GW, in your experience, have you had any Latin American role models throughout your life that have helped you get to where you are today?
Yes, of course. So thank you for that question, because even though like there is like this idea of the author as kind of like somebody that stands alone behind her or his work. I mean, of course, all of these are collective efforts, no? I mean, and you cannot get to wherever you are without a support system, no? So I would like to say that, like in my case, when I was a student in New York at the New School for Social Research, I was lucky enough to have two great mentors who are two Latin American scholars. Like both of them are actually from Argentina, although one of them is kind of like an Argentinian Mexican. And these were Pablo Picato, who is a professor at University of Columbia, and then Federico Finkenstein, that is a professor at the New School. And so they were really like they were a source of inspiration, because as Latin American scholars, they gain tenure at their institutions, and they thrive, and they have published extensively in topics that relate to my own research interest. So they inspire me to pursue an academic career, and also through their mentorship, they showed me that it was possible, no, and that it was possible also to succeed, like in academia, with an accent. And I mean it like both in terms of like the language, but also like the cultural heritage, and that it was perfectly fine, no? I mean, and that we have a lot to say and a lot to add to the conversation. And I would like to say that here at GW, there's a wonderful community also of Latin American and Latinx scholars. And Manuel Cuellar, who is also a Cisneros affiliate, is one of my very, very dear friends here at GW. So here I have also like encountered community, and as I said, like this is never like a lonely process. No, I mean, we always need to be forming community and getting like that support system.
I know it's really important, and I'm sure you serve that role for many of the students here at GW. And so I wanted to ask you, going back to a little bit of the academic background, what project are you working on like today, right now? What is your most recent endeavor?
Yes, thank you. So I continue working on questions of violence, but I'm looking more specifically right now on religion. I mean, I'm thinking more about religion, and the reason for that is because in my first book, many of the cases of lynching that I examined were actually perpetrated by Catholics, no? I mean, by people that identify as Catholic, and many of these acts were in reaction to very harsh secularizing, but also anti-clerical and even iconoclastic actions carried out by the post-revolutionary state in Mexico. So I was intrigued. I mean, I was intrigued by the fact that, in some cases, priests overtly or covertly were supporting this form of spectacular violence, that even women and elderly that identify as Catholic were participating in these atrocities, and then going to church and like going around, like their life as if nothing had happened. So I was intrigued because, of course, in principle, like religion provides this sort of like moral compass and believes in the sanctity of life. So that kind of got me into sort of like a broader question of, kind of like trying to ask what has been the relationship between religion and violence in Mexico. No, I mean, Mexico is the second country with most Catholics in the world, only after Brazil. Mexico is also considered one of the most violent countries in Latin America. If you measure in terms of homicides, is between the fifth or sixth country with highest homicide rates. And yet we know very little about that relationship. So in this new project, I'm trying to, like look at this question historically. I mean, how have Catholics, or rather religion more broadly, contribute to legitimate violence? But I'm also trying to kind of recover a story or a history of how Catholics have also contributed to peace building efforts. No, I mean, including today we hear about many priests that are actively engaged in stopping the war on drugs in Mexico, that are trying to create like mechanisms of dialogue, reparation for the victims. So I'm interested in this sort of like ambivalent relationship between religion and violence. And so hopefully I can eventually contribute to this part of the conversation.
Yeah, and we can't wait to hear about it when you do. And so our last send-off question is, what advice would you give to Latinx students looking to pursue a career in academia?
So I think I would say there is a place there is a place for you. And not only that, we need those voices. We need those voices. And again, do not shy away from, like expressing your voices, and never doubt that there is a place to be here in academia with an accent.
Thank you so much for this wonderful and inspirational words, Professor Gema Kloppe-Santamaría. I highly encourage our audience to look into taking one of your classes, because I know I do and I really enjoy it. And it's been wonderful to getting to speak with you today. And yeah, just thank you so much for your time.